Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story.
Okay, I'm running late, and it's all Joe's fault. Because Joe found a new gaming system that has a bazillion games on it, and I sort of got distracted. Plus, it's been a long day. I was very busy at work, so I'm just now getting around to doing this. So I apologize for running a little bit late. Today's video is sort of a ghost town. There are still a few people left in it, but there's not very many. It's called Lansing Creek, I believe. So check that. I hope you guys will enjoy that little drive-through. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just for you. You support me, so I support you. This shout out is for our friend Laura. Okay. We've got yoga. And we've got shadow. There's Black Beauty. There's Elsie. There's Sea Tripping. There's Sheena. There's South Dakota. There's 755. There's my Linda. Let's see. There's A&M. There's Adventure. There's Podcast. There's Lynn. There's Ava, I think. There's Patty, there's Nature, there's Resin, April and Lynn. Okay, did we get Patty this time? I think we got Patty this time. Okay, Patty, hang on a minute. Okay, so we've got Miss Patty here, and Miss Patty does kitchen, gardening, and more. She's a wonderful supporter, very fun lady to watch, and I am, like, super behind. I usually catch her lives. As you can see, I caught the last one, and then there was some food there, and she's got some garden, Dollar Tree seeds and food, lots of food, and some shorts, which are plants and food. And then, of course, her regular videos, which I'm behind on. So check her out. She's up at 5K. Like, share, comment. Have a good... All right. Everybody got a drink? A stiff drink? That's alcohol. There are laws about that.
Well, there was. Anyway. From the bearded historian point of view, something weird, wacky, and that's on Wayback Wednesday.
How dare you?
Now, on this date, they had an event known as the Prohibition area.
Because they were selling people.
Yes, a period from 1920 to 1933 where the United States prohibited the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcohol beverages. Alcohol industry was curtailed with a succession of state legislatures, and the prohibition was formally introduced nationwide under the 18th Amendment in the United States Constitution, ratified January 16, 1919. Prohibition ended with the ratification of the 21st Amendment, which repealed this amendment on December the 5th, 1933. Now, how this whole happy malarkey got about. There was a wide coalition composed of mostly Protestants, prohibitionists, first attempted to end the trade of alcoholic drinks during the 19th century. They aimed to heal what they saw as an ill society beset by alcohol-related problems such as alcoholism, domestic violence, and saloon-based political corruption.
It
was a good idea.
It was a good idea.
Now,
It was a good idea.
Really good. And like everything else, there's always good ideas that have bad results. But,
Right.
many communities introduced alcohol bans in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and enforcement of these new prohibition laws became a topic of debate. Prohibition supporters, called drives, presented it as a battle for public morals and health. The movement was taken up by progressives in the Prohibition, Democratic, and Republican parties, and gained a national grassroots base through the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Well, after 1900, it was coordinated with the Anti-Saloon League, and opposition from the beer industry mobilized wet supporters from the wealthy Catholic and German Lutheran communities, but the influence of these groups receded from 1917 following the entry of the United States into the First World War against Germany. Now, the 18th Amendment passed in 1919 with a 68% supermajority in the House and a 76% support in the Senate, and was ratified by 46 out of 48 states. Enabling legislation known as the Volstead Act set down the rules for enforcing the federal ban and defined the types of alcoholic beverages that were prohibited. Not all alcohol was banned, however. For example, religious use of wine was permitted.
Woo!
Go Reverend. Private ownership and consumption of alcohol was not made illegal under federal law, but local laws were stricter in many areas, and some states banned possession outright. By the late 1920s, a new opposition to the prohibition emerged nationwide. This opposition attacked the policy, claiming that it lowered tax revenue at a critical time before and during the Great Depression. It imposed rural Protestant religious values on urban America. The 21st Amendment ended prohibition, though it continued in some states, and to date, this is the only time in American history in which a constitutional amendment was passed for the purpose of repealing another. Now, the overall effects of prohibition on society are disputed and hard to pin down. Some research indicates that alcohol consumption declined substantially due to prohibition, but others research indicates that prohibition did not reduce alcohol consumption in the long term. Americans who wanted to continue drinking alcohol found loopholes in prohibition laws or used illegal methods to obtain alcohol, resulting in the emergence of black markets and crime syndicates dedicated to distributing alcohol. By contrast, rates of liver cirrhosis, alcoholic psychosis, and infant mortality declined during Prohibition. Because of the lack of uniform national statistics gathered about crime prior to 1930, it's difficult to draw a conclusion on Prohibition's effect on crime at the national level. Support for Prohibition diminished steadily through the duration, including among former supporters of Prohibition. Now, on November the 18th, 1918, prior to ratification of the 18th Amendment, the U.S. Congress passed the Temporary Wartime Prohibition Act, which banned the sale of alcoholic beverages having an alcohol content greater than 1.28%. This act, which had been intended to save grain for the war effort, was passed 10 days after the armistice ending World War I was signed on November 21st, 1918. The Wartime Prohibition Act took effect on June the 30th, 1919, with July the 1st becoming known as the Thirsty First.
Thirsty first. Thirsty,
Yeah.
thirsty.
Very thirsty. Hard days. Not drinking much. Now, the U.S. Senate proposed the 18th Amendment on the 18th of December, 1917. Upon being approved by the 36th state on January 16, 1919, the amendment was ratified as part of the Constitution.
Ooh.
By terms of the amendment, the country went dry 1 year later, on January 17th.
The country tried to go dry.
Tried in 1920.
I wouldn't say that they succeeded.
No. On October the 28th, 1919, Congress passed the Volstead Act, a popular name of the National Prohibition Act, over President Woodrow Wilson's veto. The act established the legal definition of intoxicating liquors as well as penalties for producing them. Although the Volstead Act prohibited the sale of alcohol, the federal government lacked resources to enforce it. Prohibition was successful in reducing the amount of liquor consumed, cirrhosis death rates, admissions to state mental hospitals for alcoholic psychosis, arrests for public drunkenness, and the rates of absenteeism. While many state that the prohibition stimulated the proliferation of rampant underground organized and widespread criminal activity, Kenneth D. Rose and George's Frank Pinard make the opposite claim, that there was no increase in crime during the Prohibition era, and that such claims are rooted in the impressionistic rather than the factual. Well, somebody had to sneak under the table to drink. Now, the highest homicide rate in the United States in the first half of the 20th century occurred during the years of Prohibition, decreasing immediately after Prohibition ended. By 1925, there were anywhere from 30,000 to 100,000 speakeasy clubs in New York City alone. That's a lot of clubs.
That is a lot of clubs.
It's like more than one per block. Wet opposition talked of personal liberty, new tax revenues from legal beer and liquor, and the scourge of organized crime. Well, March 22nd, 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt signed into law the Cullen-Harrison Act, legalizing beer with an alcohol content of 3.2% by weight and wine of similarly low alcohol content. On December 5th, ratification of the 21st Amendment would repeal the 18th Amendment. However, the United States federal law still prohibits the manufacture of distilled spirits without meeting numerous licensing requirements that make it impractical to produce spirits for personal use. And you can go frickin' blind for the wrong stuff.
How dare you?
Now, dating back in time, again, way back, consumption of alcoholic beverages has been a contentious topic in the United States since colonial time. In fact, before, in 1636, a legislature of New Somersetshire met in what's now Saco, Maine, and adopted a law limiting the sale of strong liquor and or wine, although carving out exceptions for lodgers and allowing serving to laborers on working days for 1 hour at dinner. Small glass.
Small glass.
In May of 1657, the General Court of Massachusetts made the sale of strong liquor, whether known by name of rum, strong waters, wine, strong beer, brandy, cider, or perry, or any other strong liquors to the Native Americans illegal. Didn't want them getting liquored up already.
Right?
In general, informal social controls in the home and community helped maintain the expectation that the abuse of alcohol was unacceptable. Drunkenness was condemned and punished, but only as an abuse of a God-given gift. Drink itself was not looked down upon as culpable, any more than food deserved blame for the sin of gluttony. Access was a personal indiscretion. When informal controls failed, there were legal options. Now, shortly after the United States obtained independence, the Whiskey Rebellion took place in western Pennsylvania.
Ooh, whiskey!
Whiskey! In protest of the government-imposed taxes on whiskey. Although the taxes were primarily levied to help pay down the newly formed national debt, it also received support from some social reformers who hoped a sin tax would raise public awareness about the harmful effects of alcohol. This whiskey tax was repealed after Thomas Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party, which opposed the federal party of Alexander Hamilton, where's Angel? Came to power in the 1800s. Now, Benjamin Rush, one of the foremost physicians of the late 18th century, believed in moderation rather than prohibition in his treatise, The Inquiry into the Effects of Ardent Spirits upon the Human Body and Mind. Basically, let's go get drunk and see what happens to the human.
Right?
Rush argued that excessive use of alcohol was injurious to physical and psychological health, labeling drunkenness as a disease. Apparently influenced by Rush's widely discussed belief, about 200 farmers in a Connecticut community formed a temperance association in 1789, and similar associations would be formed in Virginia and New York. Well, within a decade, other temperance groups had formed in 8 states, some of them being statewide organizations. The words of Rush and other early temperance reformers served to deconomize the use of alcohol for men and women. While men enjoyed drinking and often considered it vital to their health, women who began to embrace the ideology of true motherhood refrained from the consumption of alcohol. Middle-class women, who were considered the moral authorities of the households, consequently rejected the drinking of alcohol, which they believed to be a threat to the home. In 1830, on average, Americans consumed 1.7 bottles of hard liquor per week, 3 times the amount consumed in 2010.
That's
Wow.
actually not that
Not
bad.
bad. Yeah.
1 bottle a week?
1.7 bottles of hard liquor per week. That's like...
Okay, that depends on the size of the bottle, but that's still not too bad.
Yeah. So basically 2 bottles of Jack Daniels.
Woo! Wee!
If for some reason I can't read the dice, but...
You don't need to read the dice, I'll play the number.
Oh, goody.
Tell me it's like 11 at 7 point.
Now, the American Temperance Society, formed in 1826, helped initiate the first temperance movement and served as the foundation for many later groups. By 1835, the ATS had reached 1.5 million members, with women constituting 35 to 60% of its chapters. The Prohibition movement, also known as the Dry Crusade, continues in the 1840s, spearheaded by a range of Protestant denominations, particularly the Methodist, Baptist, and the Salvation Army. The late 19th century saw the temperance movement broaden its focus from abstinence to include all behavior and institutions related to alcohol consumption. Preachers like the Reverend Mark A. Matthews linked alcohol dispensing saloons with political corruption.
Oh no.
Heaven forbid they're doing business in the bar. Some successes for the movement were achieved in the 1850s, including the Maine Law, adopted in 1851, which banned the manufacture and sale of liquor. Before its repeal 5 years later, 12 states followed the example of set by Maine in total prohibition. The temperance movement lost strength and was marginalized during the Civil War, while following the war, social moralists turned to other issues such as Mormon polygamy and the temperance movement. The Dry Crusade was revived by a national prohibition party founded in 1869 and the Women's Christian Temperance Union, founded in 1874. This WCTU advocated the prohibition of alcohol as a method of preventing, through education, abuse from alcoholic husbands. The WCTU members believed that if the organization could reach children with its message, it could create a dry sentiment leading to prohibition. Francis Willard, the second president, held that the aims of the organization was to create a union of women from all denominations for the purpose of educating the young, forming a better public sentiment, reforming the drinking classes, transforming by the power of divine grace those who are enslaved by alcohol, and removing the dram shop from our streets by law. While they still denied universal voting privileges, women in the WCTU followed Francis Willard's do everything doctrine and used temperance as a method of entering into politics and furthering other progressive issues such as prison reform and labor laws. In 1881, Kansas became the first state to outlaw alcoholic beverages in its constitution. Arrested over 30 times and fined and jailed on multiple occasions, Prohibition activist Carrie Nation attempted to enforce the state's ban on alcohol consumption. She'd walk into saloons, scolding customers, used her hatchet to destroy bottles of liquor. Nation recruited ladies into the Carrie Nation Prohibition group, which she also led. While Nation's vigilante techniques were rare, other activists enforced the dry cause by entering saloons, singing, praying, and urging saloon keepers to stop selling alcohol. Other dry states, especially those in the South, enacted prohibition legislation, as did individual counties within the state. Now, court cases are also debated as a subject of prohibition. While some cases ruled in opposition, the general tendency was towards support. In Mugler versus Kansas in 1887, Justice Harlan commented, "We cannot shut out the view of the fact, within the knowledge of all, that the public health, the public morals, and the public safety may be endangered by the general use of intoxicating drinks, not the fact established by statistics accessible to everyone that the idleness, disorder, pauperism, and crime existing in the country are, in some degree, traceable to this evil. In support of Prohibition, Crowley versus Christensen in 1890 remarked that the statistics of every state show a greater amount of crime and misery attributed to the use of ardent spirits attained in these retail saloons than to any other source. The proliferation of neighborhood saloons in the post-Civil War era became a phenomenon of the increasingly industrialized urban workforce. Funny, we don't have any urbanism out here, but we have plenty of saloons.
True.
Now, working men's bars were popular social gathering places from the workplace and home life. The brewing industry was actively involved in establishing saloons as a lucrative consumer base of their business chain. Saloons were more often than not linked to a specific brewery, where the saloon keeper's operation was financed by a brewer and contractually obligated to sell a brewer's product to the exclusion of competing brands. Quite a way to make a monopoly. Now, a saloon's business model often included the offer of a free lunch, where the bill of fare commonly consisted of a heavily salted food meant to induce thirst in the purchase of a drink. That's kind of smart logic. During the Progressive era, the hostility towards saloons and their political influence became widespread, and the Anti-Saloon League, superseding the Prohibition Party and the Women's Christian Temperance Union as the most influential advocate of Prohibition, after these latter two groups expanded their efforts to support other social reform issues, such as women's suffrage, onto their Prohibition platform. Now, Prohibition was an important force in the state and local politics from the 1840s to the 1930s. Numerous historical studies demonstrated that the political forces involved were ethno-religious. Prohibition was supported by the drives, primarily Hasidic evangelical Protestant denominations, including Methodists, Northern Baptists, Southern Baptists, New School Presbyterians, Disciples of Christ, Congregationalists, Quakers, and Scandinavian Lutherans, but also included the Catholic Total Abstinence Union of America and, to a certain extent, the Mormons. These religious groups identified saloons as a politically corrupt and drinking as a personal sin. Secular dry organizations were led by the powerful Anti-Saloon League and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Now, the dry prohibition crusade was opposed by the Wets, led by liturgical or ritualistic Protestants, the Episcopalians, and the German Lutherans. I'm sorry, Germans are going to always be going for their beer.
What?
Hello. Now, Catholics who denounced the idea that the government should define morality. Even in the Wet stronghold of New York City, there was an active prohibition movement led by the Norwegian church groups and African American labor activists who believed that prohibition would benefit workers, especially the African Americans. Tea merchants and soda fountain manufacturers generally supported prohibition, believing a ban would increase sales of their products. That makes sense.
Makes sense.
A particularly effective operator in the political front was Wayne Wheeler of the Anti-Saloon League, who made prohibition a wedge issue and succeeded in getting many pro-prohibition candidates elected. Coming from Ohio, his deep resentment for alcohol started at a young age. He was injured on a farm by a worker who had been drunk. This event transformed Wheeler. Starting in the low ranks, he quickly moved up due to his deep-rooted hatred of alcohol. He later realized to further the movement he would need more public approval and fast. This was the start of his policy called Wheelerism, where he used the media to make it seem like the general public was in on a specific issue. Wheeler became known as the dry boss because of his influence and power. Well, Prohibition represented a conflict between the urban and rural values emerging in the United States. Given the mass influx of migrants to the urban centers, many individuals within the Prohibition movement associated the crime and morally corrupt behavior of American cities with the large immigrant populations. Saloons frequented by immigrants in these cities were often frequented by politicians who wanted to obtain the immigrants' votes in exchange for favors such as job offers, legal assistance, and food baskets. Thus, saloons were seen as a breeding ground for political corruption Heaven forbid.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, most economists during the early 20th century were in favor of the enactment of the 18th Amendment. Simon Patton, one of the leading advocates for prohibition, predicted that the prohibition would eventually happen in the United States for competitive and evolutionary reasons. Yale economics professor Irving Fisher, who was a drive, wrote extensively about prohibition, including a paper that made an economic case for prohibition. Fisher was credited with supplying the criteria against which future prohibitions, such as against marijuana, could be measured in terms of crime, health, and productivity. For example, Blue Monday referred to the hangover workers experienced after a weekend of binge drinking, resulting in Mondays being a wasted productive day. New research has discredited Fisher's research, which is based on uncontrolled experiments. Regardless, his $6 billion figure for the annual gains of prohibition to the United States continues to be cited. In a backlash to the emerging reality of the changing American demographic, many prohibitionists subscribe to the doctrine of nativism, in which they endorse the notion that the success of America was the result of its white Anglo-Saxon ancestry. This belief fostered distrust in the immigrant communities that fostered saloons and incorporated drinking into their popular culture. Two other amendments to the Constitution were championed by dry crusaders to help their cause. The first, the 16th Amendment, which replaced alcohol taxes that funded the federal government with a federal income tax. The other was women's suffrage, which was granted after the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Since women tended to support prohibition, temperance organizations tended to support women's suffrage. Now, in the presidential election of 1916, the Democratic incumbent Woodrow Wilson and the Republican candidate Charles Evans Hughes ignored the prohibition issue, as did both parties' political platforms. Democrats and Republicans had strong wet and dry factions, and the election was expected to be close, with neither candidate wanting to alienate any part of his political base. When Congress convened in March of 1917, the Dries outnumbered the Wets 140 to 64 in the Democrat Party and 138 to 62 among the Republicans. The Americans' declaration of war against Germany in April, German Americans, a new force against prohibition, were sidelined and their protests subsequently ignored. In addition, a new justification for the prohibition arose. Prohibiting the production of alcoholic beverages would allow more resources, especially grain, that would otherwise be used for making alcohol, to be devoted to the war effort.
War alcohol.
War alcohol. While wartime prohibition was the spark for the movement, World War I ended before the nationwide prohibition could be enacted. Now, a resolution calling for a constitutional amendment to accomplish nationwide prohibition was introduced in Congress and passed by both houses in December of 1917. By January 16, 1919, the amendment had been ratified by 36 of 48 states, making it a law. Eventually, only 2 states, Connecticut and Rhode Island, opted out of ratifying it. On October 28, 1919, Congress would pass the enabling legislation, the Volstead Act, to enforce the 18th Amendment, which went into effect in 1920. Now, Prohibition would begin that following year, 1920, January 17th, when the Volstead Act went into effect. A total of 1,520 federal prohibition agents, police, were tasked with enforcement. And I can just imagine these guys are just such fun people to be around. Supporters of the American Amendment soon became confident that it would not be repealed. One of the creators, Senator Morris Shepherd, joked that there is much a chance of repeal in the 18th century. The 18th Amendment is theirs for a hummingbird to fly to the planet Mars with the Washington Monument tied to its tail. At the same time, songs emerged decrying the act. After Edward, Prince of Wales, returned to the United Kingdom following his tour of Canada, he recounted to his father, King George V, a ditty which he had heard in a border town. 24 Yankees, feeling very dry, went across the border to get a drink of rye. When the rye was opened, the Yanks began to sing, "God bless America, but God save the King." The prohibition became highly controversial among medical professionals because the alcohol was widely prescribed by the era's physicians for therapeutic purposes. Hey, can I get a six-pack to go? It's for my eyesight.
My brain's like, where do you want it to go?
Subsequently, physicians across the country lobbied for the repeal of prohibition as it applied to medical liquors. And I quote, from 1921 to 1930, doctors earned about $40 million for whiskey prescriptions. While the manufacture, importation, sale, and transport of alcohol was illegal in the United States, Section 29 of the Volstead Act allowed wine and cider to be made from fruit at home, but not beer. This isn't beer, this is cider. Up to 200 gallons of wine and cider per year could be made, and some vineyards grew grapes for home use. The act did not prohibit the consumption of alcohol. Many people stockpiled wines and liquors for their personal use in the latter part of 1919 before the sale of alcoholic beverages became illegal in January of 1920. I read a thing about that. That's when the guy up in Sulphur stockpiled the liquor up before Prohibition hit. Of course, afterwards he got drunk and set the town on fire, but that's a side point.
How dare you?
Yeah. Since alcohol was legal in neighboring countries, distilleries and breweries in Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean flourished as their products were either consumed by visiting Americans or smuggled into the United States illegally. The Detroit River, which forms part of the U.S. border with Canada, was notoriously difficult to control, especially road running in Windsor, Canada. When the U.S. government complained to Britain that the prohibition was being undermined by officials in Nassau and the Bahamas, the head of the colonial office refused to intervene. Winston Churchill believed the prohibition was an affront to the whole history of mankind. No kidding. 3 federal agencies were assigned with the task of enforcing the Volstead Act: the U.S. Coast Guard, the Office of Law Enforcement, the U.S. Treasury's IRS Bureau of Prohibition, and the U.S. Department of Justice's Bureau of Prohibition. Now, like anything, if you're going to have something become illegal and people want it, they will find a way around it.
Yep.
As
and
early,
people are creative.
Oh yeah. In 19
So like you say, I can't? Well, let's see.
Watch me. Now, as early as 1925, journalist H.L. Mencken believed that Prohibition was not working, and historian David Oeshke summarized the work of Daniel Okrent, wrote, "Prohibition worked best when it was directed at its primary target, the working class poor." Historian Elizabeth Cohen writes, "A rich family could have a cellar full of liquor and get by, it seemed, but a poor family had one bottle of homebrew, there would be trouble. Working class people were inflamed by the fact that their employers could dip into the private cachet, while they, the employees, could not. Within a week after Prohibition went into effect, small portable stills were on sale throughout the country."
Woo!
Before the 18th Amendment went into effect, many of the upper classes actually stockpiled alcohol for legal home consumption after Prohibition began. This brought the inventories of liquor retailers and wholesalers empty out their warehouses, saloons, and club storerooms. Woodrow Wilson moved his own supply of alcoholic beverages to his Washington residence after his term in office ended. His successor, William G. Harding, relocated his own large supply into the White House. "What's in that swimming pool?" "That's nothing, but it's a real great dip, trust me." After the 18th Amendment became law, bootlegging became widespread. The first 6 months, federal government opened 7,291 cases for the Volstead Act violations. In the first complete fiscal year, the number of cases violating the Act jumped to 29,114 violations and would rise dramatically over the next 13 years. Now, grape juice was not restricted by Prohibition, even though it was allowed to sit for 60 days with ferment turned to wine with a 12% alcohol content. Many people took advantage of this as grape juice output quadrupled in Prohibition era. To prevent bootlickers from using industrial ethyl alcohol to produce illegal beverages, the federal government ordered the denaturation of industrial alcohols, meaning they must include additives to make them unpalatable or poisonous. In response, bootleggers hired chemists who successfully removed the additives from the alcohol to make it drinkable. In response, the Treasury Department required manufacturers to add more deadly poisons, including a particularly deadly combination referred to incorrectly as methyl alcohol. 4% methanol, 2.25% parts priodine base, and 0.5 parts benzene per 100 parts ethyl alcohol. New York City medical examiners prominently opposed these policies because of the danger to human life. As many as 10,000 people died from drinking denatured alcohol before Prohibition ended. The New York City medical examiner, Charles Norris, believed the government took responsibility for murder when they knew the poison was not deterring consumption, and they continued to poison industrial alcohol, which would not be used for drinking alcohol anyway. Norris remarked, "The government knows it's not stopping drinking by putting poison in alcohol, yet it continues its poisoning processes, heedless of the fact that people determined to drink are daily absorbing the poison." Knowing this to be heedless of the fact that people are determined to drink are
Everyone's trying to kill us off.
No kidding. The United States government must be charged with moral responsibility for the deaths poison liquor caused, although it cannot be held legally responsible. It's like we blew it, but so what? Another lethal substitute that was often substituted for alcohol was sterno, a denatured form of ethyl alcohol, adulterated with methanol and a gelling agent commonly referred to as canned heat. Forcing the substance through a makeshift filter such as a handkerchief created a rough liquor substitute. However, the result was poisonous, though not often lethal. Making liquor at home was common back for families with wet sympathies during Prohibition. Stores sold grape concentrates with warning labels that listed the steps that should be avoided to prevent the juice from fermenting into wine. Some drugstores sold medical wine that was around 22% alcohol content. In order to satisfy the sale, the wine was given a medicinal taste. Home distilled hard liquor, called bathtub gin in northern cities, and moonshine in the rural areas of Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, West Virginia, and Tennessee. Making drinkable hard liquor was easier than home brewing good beer. And since selling private distilled alcohol was illegal and bypassed the government taxation, law enforcement officers relentlessly pursued manufacturers. In response, bootleggers modified their cars and trucks by enhancing the engines and suspensions to make faster vehicles that improved their chances of outrunning and escaping the agents. Guess what? They also invented NASCAR.
Woo!
They were known as moonshine runners or shine runners. The shops with wet sympathies were also known to participate in this underground liquor market by loading their stocks with ingredients for liquors, including Benedictine, vermouth, Scotch mash, and even ethyl alcohol. Anyone could purchase these ingredients legally. In October 1930, just 2 weeks before the congressional midterm elections, bootlegger George Cassidy, the man in the green hat, came forward and told members of Congress how he had bootlegged for 10 years. One of the few bootleggers ever to tell a story, Cassidy wrote 5 front-page articles for the Washington Post in which he estimated that 80% of congressmen and senators drank.
I can see that.
Yep. The Democrats in the North were mostly wets, and in the 1932 election they made major gains. The wets argued that Prohibition was not stopping crime, was actually causing the creation of large-scale, well-funded, and well-armed crime syndicates. As Prohibition became increasingly unpopular, especially in urban areas, its repeal was eagerly anticipated. Wets had the organization and the initiative, and they pushed the argument that states and localities needed that tax money. President Herbert Hoover proposed a new constitutional amendment that was vague on particulars and satisfied neither side. Franklin Roosevelt's Democratic platform promised to repeal the 18th Amendment. Well, when Prohibition was repealed in 1933, many bootleggers and suppliers with wet sympathies simply moved into the legitimate liquor business. Some crime syndicates moved their efforts into expanding their protection rackets to cover legal liquor sales
Right.
in other business areas. Well,
So all the crime lines came from the Prohibition, and that's how the monsters came. No, just kidding.
doctors were able to prescribe medicinal alcohol for their patients, and just after 6 months of Prohibition, over 15,000 doctors and 57,000 pharmacists received licenses to prescribe or sell medicinal alcohol.
Wow.
That's a lot of alcohol.
I don't know how I feel about that.
Yep.
I don't know if I'd take that medicine. What do you think, babes?
Yeah, well, we know you in medicine. Now, interestingly enough, some states, like Maryland and New York, refused to enforce the federal Prohibition Amendment. Enforcement of the law under the 18th Amendment lacked a centralized authority. Clergymen were sometimes called upon to form vigilantes groups to assist the enforcement of Prohibition. Furthermore, American geography contributed to the difficulties enforcing it. The very terrain of valleys, mountains, lakes, and swamps, as well as the extensive seaways, ports, and borders that the United States shored with Canada and Mexico made it exceedingly difficult for Prohibition agents to stop bootleggers, given their lack of resources. Ultimately, it was recognized with its repeal that the means by any which the law was to be enforced was not pragmatic, and in many cases the legislature did not match the general public opinion. Even speaking of up here, there were some places where some towns just choose to be dry,
Right.
and they were basically punished for it. Down Owanka, that was one of their trademarks, is that they ran on the fact that they were a dry town. And of course, people would, take it head on up to Wall, or they would head over to New Underwood so they could get their alcohol. But one thing I always did find funny is up in the far north of South Dakota, there were two towns. There was Haley in North Dakota, and there was Vesey in South Dakota. And what happened there is that in North Dakota, the drinking age was 18. The drinking age in South Dakota was 21. And it was always crazy because this path in the evening was always beaten down by farmers and workers to go down and have a drink or three, and then afterwards they would stagger back home, back up to Haley, because, well, somebody was making a lot of money at that saloon, to say the least. But it served its purpose. But after this happy little experiment would come to a crash, Prohibition was a major blow to the alcoholic beverage industry, and its repeal was a step towards the amelioration of one sector of the economy. One example is the case of St. Louis, one of the most important alcoholic producers before Prohibition started, which was ready to resume its position in the industry as soon as possible. Its major brewery had 50,000 barrels of beer ready for distribution from March 22, 1933. It is the first alcohol producer to resupply the market. Others would soon follow. After repeal, stores attained liquor licenses and restocked for business, and after beer production resumed, thousands of workers would find jobs in the industry again. And you got to remember, in 1933, that was in the middle of the Great Depression. So not only was money flowing again, people were working, and people were getting liquored up, and they were happy. And it's also kind of irony, because you think about guys like Al Capone and the guys that ran, the speakeasies. They basically were able to go legit, heaven forbid. Of course, granted, you're still not supposed to shoot people, crazy stuff like that. But because they had the black market that struck when the Depression hit in 1929. And again, they talked about the state governments urgently needing tax revenue the alcohol sales had generated. So when Franklin Roosevelt was elected in 1932, that's what helped produce the ratifying the 21st Amendment. And the Wickersham Commission in 1929 that studied the Prohibition enforcement was created. In the final report, commonly known as the Wickersham Report, released in January 7th, 1931, documented the widespread evasion of prohibition. People are smart. If they want something,
I'm just kidding.
they're smart at being stupid. How about that? Prohibition, it's an awful flop. We like it. It can't stop what it's meant to stop. We like it. It left a trail of graft and slime. It don't prohibit worth a dime. It's filled our land with vice and crime. Nevertheless, we're for it. Yeah, that was the opinion of Franklin P. Adams, a columnist from New York World, summarizing the opinion of the Commission's report. Effectively, the repeal would come through. People would celebrate this happy change. And, to this day, I think the biggest thing that people, when it comes to liquor and spirits, and, we were just watching a show earlier tonight, and they talked about a what do they call it? A social drunk,
Right.
who can actually a functioning drunk.
Functioning drunk.
Because some people can drink fine and know their limits and hold their liquor. Some people can't handle it, and it's really hard to get some people to realize that you shouldn't have that next drink. I know they've done a lot of work in the last 50 years trying to educate people about the dangers of driving drunk. Even to this day, there are some races who just cannot handle booze. But like everything, I think that there is a time and a place, and they have people that if they can handle it, it's good for them. It helps them get through their day. More power to them. For people that can't tolerate it very well and like to throw up in the alley, sir, why don't you take a seat and have a Coke? Make it safe. But this has been the Bearded Historian for Prohibition, its start, and thankfully it ended. And I don't know, Sue might not let me see you guys next week. You'll have to beg her permission to make me perform next week.
Raise your glass.
Cheers.
What are we cheering to?
Prohibition.
Cool beans.
Have some grape juice.
I like grape juice.